Welcome to History What If, where we question the events that already happened. What really could have happened? Could we have changed the outcome? Before we begin, everything you're about to hear is based on historical research, facts, and records. The what if scenarios are my own opinion and interpretation of events, designed to make you think, question, and explore history differently. This is not the official historical record. This is history, through a different lens. 1972, Washington, D.C. Richard Nixon, 37th President of the United States, was having, by almost any measure, a fantastic year. He had just opened diplomatic relations with China. He was negotiating arms control with the Soviet Union. He was running for re-election and winning by a landslide. Everything was going incredibly well. And then, on June 17, 1972, at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, a 24-year-old security guard named Frank Wills was doing his rounds at the Watergate hotel complex in Washington, D.C., and he noticed something. Tape, masking tape, on a door latch, keeping the door from locking. Frank Wills removed the tape and carried on. An hour later, he came back around. The tape was back. Someone had retaped the door. Frank Wills called the police. And that one phone call, made by one security guard, about one piece of tape, on one door at 2 in the morning, set in motion the biggest political scandal in American history. And it started with tape, not the recording kind, the sticky kind. The irony will become relevant shortly. The police arrived and found 5 men inside the offices of the Democratic National Committee, the headquarters of the opposing political party. They had cameras, surveillance equipment, and wiretapping devices. They were, in the politest possible terms, absolutely not supposed to be there. The 5 men were arrested. And at first, Nixon's people tried to dismiss the whole thing. Nixon's press secretary called it a third-rate burglary attempt, which is a remarkable description of a break-in at your opponent's headquarters organized by your own campaign staff. Third-rate, burglary, attempt. They really went with that. But the problem with calling something a third-rate burglary is that it still has to be investigated. And as investigators began pulling on the thread, they found it led somewhere very inconvenient. Straight back to the White House. Now here is where Nixon's real problem began, because Nixon didn't actually order the break-in. The operation was run by his campaign team without his direct knowledge. When it all went wrong, he might have been okay. He could have said, "My people did this. I didn't know. They're fired. I'm sorry." He didn't say that. Instead, Nixon chose to cover it up. He tried to use the CIA to block the FBI investigation. He authorized hush money payments to the burglars to buy their silence. He destroyed evidence. He lied, repeatedly, on camera, to the nation. And then, on April 9th, 1973, in the Oval Office, he had a conversation with his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman. Nixon said, and I am quoting directly here, "I don't want to have in the record discussions we've had in this room on Watergate." He was talking about destroying the recordings. And Bob Haldeman agreed. And then neither of them did anything about it. Because, and this is the part that makes historians grip the sides of their desks, the entire conversation was being recorded by the recording system that they were talking about destroying. Let's talk about the taping system, because it's important and also deeply, deeply ironic. Nixon had installed a secret recording system throughout the White House starting in 1971. Hidden microphones in the Oval Office, the Cabinet Room, the Lincoln Sitting Room, Camp David, and a tap on several telephones. Nearly 3,700 hours of conversations recorded. Everything, all of it, captured. Now, every president since Franklin Roosevelt had recorded conversations in the White House. Nixon wasn't unusual for that. What was unusual was that Nixon recorded himself committing crimes, which is a level of self-defeating behavior that takes genuine commitment. The taping system's existence was a secret, known only to a select few inside the White House, until July 1973, when former White House aide Alexander Butterfield testified before the Senate Watergate Committee, live, on television, watched by millions of people. He mentioned the tapes, and everything changed. And here, right here, is where our what if begins. Because the moment Butterfield revealed the tapes existed, Nixon's lawyers started arguing about what to do. Some of his advisors told him to destroy the tapes immediately. Nixon's records were considered his personal private property at the time. No law prevented him from destroying them. One advisor, Leonard Garment, actually urged Nixon not to destroy them, arguing they would ultimately prove his innocence. Reader, they did not prove his innocence. Nixon decided to keep the tapes. His reasoning, according to people in the room, was that he believed they would ultimately help him, that they would show his conversations were taken out of context, that he could use them to exonerate himself, that keeping them was the smarter play. It was not the smarter play. They did not exonerate him. They ended his presidency. Of the nearly 3,700 hours of recordings, only about 5% contained references to Watergate. Most of the tapes were mundane. Political discussions, policy arguments, Nixon talking about things presidents talk about. But two tapes in particular were, as they say in legal circles, extremely bad for Nixon. The worst was the conversation from June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the Watergate break-in, between Nixon and his chief of staff Bob Haldeman. On that tape, Nixon could be heard directing Haldeman to use the CIA to obstruct the FBI's investigation. That is, to be precise about it, obstruction of justice, by the president, on tape, saying it out loud, to another person, who was also on tape. This tape became known as the smoking gun tape because when it was released on August 5, 1974, Nixon's remaining political support in Congress collapsed within hours. Republicans who had been defending him for 2 years, who had gone on television to say Nixon had nothing to hide, read the transcript, went very quiet, and then started calling for his resignation. 3 days later, on August 8, 1974, Richard Nixon announced his resignation, the first and only U.S. president ever to resign from office. He left the White House the following day. He gave the thumbs up on the steps of his helicopter. He got on board. He flew away. He was gone. One more detail before we get to the what if, because it is too good to leave out. In December 1973, it was revealed that one of the key tapes, a conversation recorded just days after the Watergate break-in, had an 18.5-minute gap, a section of recording that had been erased. Gone. Blank. Nixon's personal secretary, Rosemary Woods, said she accidentally caused the erasure while transcribing by reaching for the phone while her foot accidentally stayed on the record pedal. The physical position required to do this accidentally became known as the Rosemary stretch. It was not widely believed. The tape gap was almost certainly deliberate, but by that point, it almost didn't matter because the tapes that remained were already enough. So, our what if. July 1973. Alexander Butterfield has just revealed the taping system exists. The Senate wants the tapes. The special prosecutor wants the tapes. Everyone wants the tapes. Nixon has a choice. What if he made the other one? What if Nixon, in the summer of 1973, simply destroyed every tape? He had the legal right to do so at the time. Presidential records were considered personal property. No law required him to preserve them. He could have ordered every reel burned, shredded, erased. And the evidence, the actual audio evidence of his conversations, would have been gone. What if Nixon, in the summer of 1973, simply destroyed every tape? He had the legal right to do so at the time. Presidential records were considered personal property. No law required him to preserve them. He could have ordered every reel burned, shredded, erased. And the evidence, the actual audio evidence of his conversations, would have been gone. Would it have been suspicious? Absolutely. Would people have assumed the worst? Of course. But without the actual recordings, without Nixon's own voice directing the cover-up in his own words, what prosecutors had was testimony, witness accounts, people saying what they remembered. And witnesses can be challenged, discredited, doubted. A recording of the president himself saying the words, you cannot argue with that. Nixon was not guaranteed to be impeached even with the tapes. Without them, the outcome is genuinely uncertain. And Nixon knew politics. He was good at politics. He might have weathered the storm. He might have served out his second term. He might have walked away clean. Gerald Ford, Nixon's vice president, became president. He immediately pardoned Nixon for any crimes he may have committed. The country was furious. Ford's approval rating dropped 21 points overnight. That fury more than almost anything else, contributed to Ford losing the 1976 election to a relatively unknown former governor of Georgia named Jimmy Carter. No Nixon resignation likely means no Ford presidency. No Ford presidency means no Ford pardon. No pardon scandal means Ford runs a stronger 1976 campaign. Jimmy Carter, one of the most unlikely presidents in history, might never have made it to the White House. Ronald Reagan, who challenged Ford in the 1976 Republican primary, might have run a different race at a different time with different results. The entire political landscape of the late 1970s and 1980s could look completely different. And then there is the law itself. After Nixon resigned, Congress passed the Presidential Records Act in 1978, which made presidential records public property and barred future presidents from destroying them. That law exists specifically because of Watergate, because of Nixon, because of what he did and what he got away with long enough to make people realize the rules needed changing. No Watergate scandal, no Presidential Records Act. The rules governing how presidents handle records today, those rules might not exist. Richard Nixon was, by almost any historical assessment, a complicated man, brilliant strategist, paranoid to his core, a president who achieved genuinely significant things, the opening of China, arms control with the Soviets, and then destroyed his own legacy by lying about a break-in he didn't even order. He famously said afterward, "I gave them a sword and they stuck it in." He was right. The sword was the tapes, and he handed them over. Could he have destroyed those tapes? Yes, legally, at the time. Would it have saved his presidency? Possibly, probably. Would the truth have come out another way eventually? Maybe. We can never know for certain. But the man who was careful enough to record 3,700 hours of his own conversations wasn't careful enough to destroy the ones that mattered. The microphone got him. Not the FBI, not the Senate, not Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, excellent journalists though they were. The microphone he installed himself, in his own office, to record himself, is the thing that ended the Nixon presidency. Not the crime, not even the cover-up, the recordings of the cover-up. His own voice, his own words, on tape. If this video made you think, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. What do you think could have been different? This is History What If, and I'll see you in the next one.